All right, we are now recording. Hello and welcome back to the Slow Reading Virtual Book Club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Eudora Welty's novels, The Robber Bridegroom and The Ponder Heart. During this series, we have read and discussed about 40 pages of each book each week, starting with The Robber Bridegroom. And today we are returning from a 2-week break to discuss the first half of The Ponder Heart. A final discussion comparing both novels will be on October 21st. I'm Anna Traylor, the education specialist at the Eudora Welty House and Garden. We are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer, and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College for guiding these discussions. Just some housekeeping. To ask a question, click the reaction button. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at that chat box every now and then. Before we begin, I'd like to take a second to introduce Elizabeth Kimbanga, who works with the Welty collection at the William Winter Archives building in downtown Jackson. Liz came across some interesting materials related to the dramatizations of these Welty works. Liz, can you tell us a little bit about what you found and how folks might get access to these things if they are interested?
Yeah, hi everyone. I apologize in advance for my internet connection. Technical difficulties may ensue. Um, but I wanted to share some of the materials that we have related to the dramatizations of both The Ponder Heart and The Robber Bridegroom. And I will just share my screen. So can everyone see my screen?
Not quite yet, Liz.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. So here we have an image of David Wayne and Sarah Marshall, and this was one of uh, the productions of The Ponder Heart on Broadway. And you can find these materials in series 33 dramatizations of Welty's works. And I'll just go through these so y'all can see a sampling of what we have here at the William F. Winter Building. We have newspaper clippings. Here's Welty and the Ponder Heart. This is also Sarah Marshall and David Wayne, 1956. Here we have Charlotte Capers and Cliff
I'm going to
Bingham.
let me ask right now, Liz. My memory, very faulty, though it may be, is that this was about 1958. Does anyone know the date of this? Was a production at the Little Theater in Jackson. If anyone remembers the date, we'll look it up on newspapers.com after we finish. If no one remembers, but I'm guessing 58.
Yes, and here we have the program from the Jackson Little Theater production with Charlotte Capers. We we see 33rd season. Maybe it is 1958. Hopefully, we're correct in that. Um, this is also, I believe this is the new stage program
Yes, new
for the
stage.
Ponder Heart. And I can't see my dates, of
That would have
course.
been 1970, I think.
Right. I was trying to find, I had written it down somewhere. Yes, 1970. Here are some more news clippings. Eudora Welty with the cast, the Ponder Heart. This one was also new stage. Here we have a little note from David Wayne to Eudora Welty on one of the Country Playhouse playbills. We have a newspaper clipping of Mary Alice and Liz on their way to see the Ponder Heart at New Stage. Here we have The Robber Bridegroom soundtrack. This is a vinyl record that we have, I believe 1977, but I believe this production started in 1975 or 6. And then here we have the acting company playbill. This was on Broadway, and I believe this one was 1975. And here we have it signed by the entire cast. Here's the other playbill that was on Broadway, 1976. So I'll take you through a really quick tour. This is a very brief tour of how you can access the Eudora Welty collection at the Archives and History. This is the Welty collection finding aid. It has changed. We've updated our cataloging system. So it looks a little cleaner these days. Here you can access each series within the collection. We have 45 series. And I give a little brief overview for each series to help you find which one you're looking for. So series 34 is dramatizations of Welty's fiction. And if you click on it, here's all that we have outlined by each stage adaptation. We have memorabilia, we have drafts of the adaptations that were sent to Welty. There's some correspondence in there. And this is how you can access the Welty collection materials. Normally, to get to that page, and I can send a link in the chat of this page, but normally you would go to our website, go to catalog, and this is our catalog. And you would type in the collection number, which is Z0301. And this is nothing that you have to remember, because when you come to the archives to do research, we can always help you with this information. But I just wanted to go ahead and show y'all that is what the Welty collection finding aid looks like, and the catalog record. These materials are not digitized. We do have the digital archives, which I can always talk about at another point. But it's worth checking out. We have manuscripts, photographs, correspondence on there. Yeah, so let me unshare.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Liz.
Yeah.
It's really fun to go to the archives and work with you and have you help.
Absolutely.
1956.
Are you ready for me now, Anna?
1956 says Pearl. Yes. So with that, we
Thank you,
shall
Pearl.
begin with
What was it,
Suzanne.
Pearl? 56?
1956.
Oh, thank you.
And Cheryl posted the opening and closing dates in the chat. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl and Pearl. So with that, Suzanne, I'll hand it over to you.
That's one of those things I used to know. Now I know it again. So let me talk a little bit about the composition and publication of the Ponder Heart, and a bit about dramatizations, and some about scholarship on the Ponder Heart. In 1952, in the summer of 1952, Eudora Welty was working on a story called Never Mind Uncle Daniel. And she was still working on it in January of 1953, when she went to New York and spent 6 weeks in New York. And she finished a draft of it, and she read it aloud to her friends, William and Emily Maxwell. William Maxwell, the fiction editor at the New Yorker, and his wife, Emmy. And they loved her reading. She was the actress extraordinaire. So Here's a description of that afternoon when Eudora read aloud to them. I see Eudora standing by the window with the manuscript in her hands. It went on all morning and all afternoon, as I remember, with time out for lunch. As a reader, Eudora is better than a whole company of actors, and when I am moved to laughter, it is often accompanied by tears of amusement. I shed them all through the first half of the book, but was dry-eyed during the second half, not because it wasn't funny, but because the tear glands gave up. So there was a great reading of it. She wasn't finished revising. She went back home, worked on it a bit more. And in May of that year, her friend Mary Lou Aswell came to visit in Jackson, and Eudora let Mary Lou read the story. I don't think she gave a dramatized reading to Mary Lou, but Mary Lou read it. And Mary Lou had just taken a new job with Ballantine Books, a paperback book publisher, and she wanted that book for Ballantine Books. So Eudora asked her agent, Dermot Russell, and Dermot said, no, he had other plans and he wasn't real keen on paperbacks, and he thought there was more money to be made other ways. And Mary Lou very graciously acquiesced and said, yeah, of course, Dermot is right. And so in July of 1953, Dermot and Eudora's publishing house, Harcourt, agreed that Harcourt would publish the book. And shortly after that, the New Yorker took the Ponderheart and it would publish it in a separate issue, a single issue, December 5th, 1953. The book came out January 7th, 1954. That summer of 1954, just after the book had been published, Eudora went to Cambridge in England for the American Studies Conference there, and she delivered her lecture, Place and Fiction, which we might think about in terms of the Ponderheart and what it says about place. She also published in the TLS an article, unsigned as was the TLS practice at the time, titled The Southern Writer's Inheritance. And in that essay, she wrote this: Southerners do write. Probably they must write. It is the way they are born, readers and reciters, great document holders, diary keepers, letter exchangers and savers, history tracers, and outstaying the rest, great talkers. Emphasis in talk is on the narrative form and the verbatim conversation for which time is needed. Children who grow up listening through rewarding stretches of unhurried time, reading in big lonely rooms, dwelling in the confidence of slow changing places, are naturally more prone than other children to be entertained from the first by life and to feel free, encouraged, and then in no time compelled to pass their pleasure on. They cannot help being impressed by a world around them where history has happened in the yard or come into the house, where all around the countryside big things happened and monuments stand to the memory of fiery deeds still to be heard from the lips of grandparents, the columns in the field, or the familiar cedar avenue leading uphill to nothing where such and such a house once stood. At least one version of an inextinguishable history of everybody and his grandfather is a community possession, not for a moment to be forgotten, just added to with due care mostly. The individual is too much cherished as such for his importance ever to grow diminished in a story. The rarity in a man is what is appreciated and encouraged. So the oral tradition, Eudora tracing the Southern literature to the oral tradition. Well, after the Ponderheart was published, playwrights and producers began to be interested in producing this play. Jerome Chodoroff and Joseph Fields were two playwrights who were interested in adapting the play for the stage, the novel for the stage. Herman Levin was a producer interested in producing it, and they were ultimately signed on. David Wayne, Eudora had originally thought she would love to have Danny Kaye play Uncle Daniel, but David Wayne played Uncle Daniel. Una Merkel played Edna Earl, and Sarah Marshall played Bonnie D. Peacock. Eudora was put off by her encounters with Chodoroff and Fields. She thought that they were missing the sort of the atmosphere of the play, especially the sense of the narrator of Edna Earl. So she was very apprehensive about it. But her friends organized a first night party, and she went along with Dermot and Rosie Russell, William and Emmy Maxwell, Mary Lou, her friend Mary Lou Aswell, her friend Agnes Sims, Dolly Wells, who was a Jacksonian living in New York, Charlotte Capers, who came up from Jackson for it, Hubert Creekmore, and the David Rockefellers. The David Rockefellers were neighbors and friends of the Russells, and that's how Eudora had come to know them. She loved it. She was stage struck, and she just loved being in the theater, and she loved the cast, and she loved what she saw. And she went again in April with her mother, brought her mother up from Jackson. She went again in May on her own, and in that case, and that time, she managed to get a seat on stage, unbeknownst to David Wayne, who was playing Uncle Daniel. And here is an account of that. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. She joined the cast for the play's third act and surprising David Wayne. When a startled Wayne, playing Uncle Daniel Ponder, saw Eudora seated in the onstage courtroom, he inquired, "Can you see all right, Miss Welty?" So there she was on stage for that production. She went one more time before the play closed on June 27th. As Cheryl helped us find out, it was in 1956 that Charlotte Capers played Edna Earl Ponder in The Ponder Heart in Jackson. And in 1970, Eudora's friend Jane Petty played Edna Earl at New Stage Theater. There was a PBS film made of the play in 2001. So if you want to see it on film, you can do that. Let me mention two articles to you that my friend Harriet has called to my attention, and I've just read overnight. One is by Julia Eichelberger, and it's called Historicizing the Ponder Heart. And it's about the historical context of the Ponder Heart. What about those highways? What about cutting down the forest? What about cotton, the price of cotton? What about electricity coming to Mississippi? What about the roads being paved? So all of that Julia talks about and puts the Ponder Heart in the context of it. That was published in the Eudora Welty Review in 2001. Pearl, isn't that the first issue of the review as opposed to the newsletter? I'm not sure. I think it was. But anyway, 2001. The other one I want to mention to you is an article by Rebecca Mark, which is in Welty and Mystery, Hidden in Plain Sight. And it's an article called Courts Open, The Ponder Heart and Murderous Women. And it's a feminist reading of the women in the novel being fighting against being stereotyped and defined by misogynist stereotypes. And Courts Open is the phrase in that title that I'm particularly interested in, because I want to talk about all of the allusions to courtroom, all of the references to courtrooms that come before we are actually in a courtroom. So we'll think about all of that. Okay, so that's my those are my introductory comments. Does anybody want to add anything before we start our discussion of the novel or novella? I thought I saw a hand up earlier. Jane. We can't hear you, Jane.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can.
I just want to say that I just love listening to Eudora Welty. She is quite a dramatic presenter. And when I read her stories, which I absolutely love, I read them very carefully and I listen for her voice as I'm reading, because she is just a fabulous presenter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just really think she is, I didn't realize that this was presented as a play when I read it at first, but
Well,
I can certainly see
it
it.
wasn't a play at first. It was the novella, but it then became a play adapted by, not by Eudora Welty herself, but by other uh, adapters. Okay, Joellen and then Laura.
Okay, thanks. I just want to mention briefly that Michael Kraling in Eudora Welty and Mystery also deals with the Ponder Heart more from looking at it as noir.
Okay, thank you. So another mystery reference. And Laura.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say I've been reading it and also listening to the audiobook of it.
Mhm.
And there's
Who
an
reads the
audiobook version.
audiobook?
It's not Eudora, but it's Sally Darling is her name, and it's good. It really adds something to that sort of to the conversational aspect. And I have to admit, I listen to audiobooks while I'm walking, and I've been laughing at very inappropriate times while walking. And it's so fun.
Right. Yeah. Pearl.
Sally Darling is also the one who did the Delta Wedding books on tape, and it's very good.
I haven't listened to them. I'll listen to them now. But this, I think, is a good way to take up my first question for discussion, and that is, you open up the Ponder Heart and you realize that we have a dramatic monologue here, that this is not Eudora Welty narrated novel. This is a character speaking, Edna Earl Ponder. And what about Edna Earl do we find out in her own voice? What sort of person is our narrator? And let's talk just about the first section, the first chapter. The chapters aren't numbered, but I'm going to number them for us. So let's talk about the first chapter and what we find out about Edna Earl here. What's your sense of her as a character? And Laura may want to talk about what she prompted her to laughter too. So anyone want to start us out on Edna Earl? Who is Laura, and then Cheryl.
Yeah, well, I will, because I think the thing that made me laugh a lot was her comments about being the smart one, because that's something that stuck with me. And because I kept asking as things happened, is she the smart one? Because there were some things that were so insightful, that she would say incredibly insightful and humorously insightful, but then other things that made me wonder how much she was like Uncle Daniel at the same time.
All right. She says, the second page of the story, it's always taken a lot out of me being smart. Okay, so it's always taken a lot out of me being smart. What do you think, Cheryl? How smart is she?
I like her her self-confidence, because it's not it doesn't strike me as arrogant. It's to me, she's delightfully overconfident and very practical in her mind, and very wise in her mind, because she knows how to treat Uncle Daniel, because he's just like a man like all of them. And she knows that she's Grandpa's favorite, let alone because she's the only one in the vicinity or still alive, but she would still be his favorite anyway. And I think that she is delightful. And she's like, when she talks about being the manager of the hotel, how like you couldn't do it, but I can do it. I can manage 12 rooms plus 2 Negroes plus this. And she's like, I don't know the exact word for it, because it's like she knows that she's sacrificing herself, but she's delighted to do it. And she feels like she's the only one who would be capable of doing it, of running all of this.
I had actually written down arrogant, Cheryl, but I'll take your view too, because then I crossed it out and I thought, well, overconfidence. I like overconfidence or self-absorption, maybe. But yeah, she's got those 2 Negroes to manage. She's something of a racist too, isn't she? What, like she runs the rummage sale. The rummage sale she's selling to African Americans in the town so that she can support Afro-American missionaries in Africa, to convert the native population. I mean, there's a kind of sort of casual racism, isn't there? What do you think?
Is it racism, or is she aware of her social position?
Well,
Social
certainly.
position, and then that's part of the irritation with Uncle Daniel's behavior, is he's not behaving as a member of his class.
That's
Should.
right. She certainly is focused on class too, isn't she? She has a sense of her position in the community. Let's go to Jane and Pearl and Harriet. Jane, you want to start?
Yes, I just want to say that on a very superficial level, I couldn't help hearing in her voice, of the voice of Edna Earl, the voice of the narrator of Why I Live at the PO. I just heard it's the same person throughout as I was reading / listening in my head to the voice of that narrator. But I have to agree with everything Cheryl said. She's very full of herself, very know-it-all, and she feels that she's on top.
Yeah, I think that comparison to Why I Live at the PO is a good one. Another dramatic monologue, but a much shorter one. Yeah. Pearl?
That is partly what I was going to say. It's just totally, she's one-sided, as is.
Bigger on one side than the other?
Yes. Well, not physically, but mentally. It's all her point of view, that kind of one-sidedness. And the comment about the rummage sale, I think, is very telling. And I would read it definitely as racist, but it shows that she's not so smart because she doesn't even realize the irony of what she is bragging about, that she's serving this for the Africans. I mean, so this lack of self-understanding, even if she thinks she's the smartest one. And then I also think about how on page 341, she says, and listen, if you read, you'll put your eyes out. Let's just talk.
Yeah.
In a sense, this makes me think of Twain's The Celebrated Frog of Calaveras County, because she's got and sister in Why I Live at the PO, because she's trapped her audience, her listener, her patrons, so to speak, or whoever is happening to read. You're trapped now, and you're only hearing her side of the whole story. And then
if you happen to stumble in, your car breaks down and you stumble into the Beulah Hotel,
exactly,
you're going to hear this story. Yeah. So that whole
lastly, she says how she's the same, like this same age or the same generation as her uncle Daniel, the way that the ages move out. And so when she says that he's about 50, when she says something about being 50, he's up in his 50s now on 341. So that's about what age she is also. Remember, she is unmarried. And so when she talks about this old widow, again, that's lack of self-knowledge about who she is.
Yeah, she is in a situation where she's expected to sort of take care of people here. And she's finding ways to have her own power, and she's pretty manipulative. She's the one that finds Miss Tea Cake McGee and convinces Uncle Daniel to marry him. So she's working. She has her way of. She's in charge of the hotel. She has her sphere of control in a world where women are not expected to have prominent positions. Yeah, Harriet.
Yeah, I guess I was going to talk about the way in which she is overconfident and of her control. That she presents us as she's the one who is taking care of everything, and she is, but she's also not. She's being used up by her uncle and her grandfather. She is at their mercy, and I was going to say too, in terms of her racism, which is blatant. It's interesting that text shows, say, in her relationship to Narcissus, which is busy putting her down. Narcissus pays no attention to her whatsoever, and goes ahead with driving the car and being in charge of where they're going, and getting them married, so I'm just
It's the sister who says, we're going to keep her. Yeah.
that's right. The real relationship is between Narcissus and Bunny too, but that sense of her assuredness, what she and to a certain extent, we have a sense that she tells the story in order to understand it. But it's also full of our sense of not, I'm thinking about all of her use of sweet and perfect for Uncle Daniel, when I think it's a little bit like Bless Your Heart. There's something, there's some tension that hasn't quite reached her consciousness, but it does reach ours.
I do think of her as genuinely fond of Uncle Daniel, but also of trying to control him, not to be controlled, but to be in control. The other thing about her I wanted to say is how provincial she is. Let's don't go to Silver City. Why would we want to go there? Everything we need's here in Clay. This from Eudora Welty, who's reading the story to William Maxwell in New York City and finishing it in New York City, who's just been to Europe and who doesn't have that kind of provinciality. Yeah, Joellen.
I wanted to mention, we haven't really mentioned her family very much, but she places herself through her family pedigree, which also involves a good deal of what things used to be. I mean, she was given the hotel by Uncle Daniel 15 years ago, and Miss Eubanks, somebody ran it down, and she bemoans the fact before the highway went through. And so we get a really concrete sense of what a crummy place it kind of is, despite the fact that she dwells on property and how rich her family is. Also, I want to mention the dramatic monologue is defined by a person dramatically speaking to someone else. And in the first paragraph, you is used at least 8 times. And she makes something of a character. The listener takes on aspects of a character when she is kind of tutoring him about what's to come with Uncle Daniel. She says, oh, don't read. She's tutoring him on how to deal with her. We'll have so much more fun talking. And she creates a kind of antagonist of him when they're talking about the asylum. Whatever you say about it, I abhor the asylum. And then I don't know whether this suggests that he's looking bored or anything, but top of page 345, she talks about other traveling people who've come through. I used to dread he might get hold of one of these occasional travelers that wouldn't come in unless they had to, the kind that would break in on a story. And she says, but he would love you. He would be crazy about you because you're closer to home. And then a couple of paragraphs later, we get a picture of her would-be lover, Mr. Springer, who's the perfect listener. So that part of it is important as well. And I think that as far as some of the business about the rummage sale and all of that, it's one example where she's pulling in just a little bit of the political in the current situation in the mid-1950s.
I also want to say that when she talks about him, the kind of a visitor who's inappropriate is a Yankee. Yeah, some Yankee. That's who would behave like that. So there's that more of that provinciality. Laura.
I'm so glad that passage was brought up, because that's the one that as a reader, I guess I have a lot of questions about Uncle Daniel. And I guess I was thinking about how we as readers, how do we not be like one of these occasional travelers who comes and just asks a bunch of questions? And, I guess I was just trying to think about how, I guess just by listening, but I have a lot of questions.
I think also there is that the Southern storyteller is typically one person who takes over, holds the stage, and is not going to give it up. And That's Edna Earl. Let's talk about the asylum, because the key event in this first section is the switcheroo where Grandpa gets left at the asylum. So on 345 and 46. Grandpa, one time for a treat, brought Uncle Daniel home to vote and took him back to the asylum through the country in the new Studebaker. They started too early and got there too early, I told them. And there was a new lady busying herself at the front instead of the good old one, low in the hole, as Uncle Daniel says. The lady asked him who the old man was. Uncle Daniel was far and away the best dressed and most cheerful of the two, of course. Uncle Daniel says, "Man alive, don't you know that's Mr. Ponder?" And the lady was loading the Coca-Cola machine and says, "Oh, foot, I can't remember everybody," and called somebody. Sorry. My phone is ringing. So now. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me? Good. And says, "Oh, foot, I can't remember everybody," and call somebody, and they took Grandpa, hat, stick, and everything. They backed him right down the hall and shut the door on him. Boom. And Uncle Daniel waited and dallied and had a Coca-Cola with his nickel when they got cold, and then lifted his hat and politely backed out the front door and found Grandpa's car with the engine running still under the crepe myrtle tree and drove it on home and got here with it, though by the time he did, he was as surprised as Grandpa. So what about that scene? Why do you think is going on with that scene here, and why that scene in the novel? I love that Coca-Cola for a nickel. I can remember when they cost a nickel. Those were the good old days. Yeah, Pearl?
I just want to point out how beautifully she lets us know about time, like, because he got his Coca-Cola with the nickel when they got cold.
Right.
So he waited quite a long time, which then emphasizes again how long it was, because the engine is still running out there.
Not out of gas yet.
No, I just love that little detail when they got cold.
Harriet?
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think that we're looking at the limitation of the sphere of influence of this family. I think somewhere in that scene, she says, "Just imagine 50 miles out, and this family is everything changes." Grandpa rants about how she should not be there, and we have and then the text says that's what crazy is. So the assertion of the power of this family is presented in a comic aspect about how it's a little crazy. Grandma has owned the hotel, which has been some one kind of property, and Grandpa has been land rich and sold timber and become wealthy as well as land rich. And in this very limited sphere of clay, the family is holding on to its power despite the sense of it having dissolved. Uncle Daniel, I always think about Welty's characters who are sometimes described as simple-minded. And I think the right word for them is not that. I think they are eccentric. And I think that in a certain sphere, we're looking at characters who are eccentric in their presentation of themselves.
Let me go there, because what I think this is all about is, how do we define insanity? Is it somebody who gives things away, who's generous? Is it somebody who can't tell a lie? Is it somebody who really, he's pretty much oblivious to issues of race, as Edna Earl is not, and class. And so who's crazy? And the crazy one is the person who's not focused on money and not focused. Now, as being a sexist, that's something else. I think he is, and assumes that his superiority as masculine. But I think that the story is interrogating this whole idea definition of sanity and insanity. What?
That's crazy.
Cheryl, and then John.
So I'm going to, when I go to reread the rest of the book, look out for more of the racist episodes, because I still am more struck by this need for appropriate behavior connected to your social class. And when Joellen was mentioning the lineage, and Uncle Daniel gets sent to the asylum, but he almost immediately gets a pass because their great grandfather Bell had been a big railroad man, and they had a private passenger train from that railroad.
He has a pass on the train, and they let him out of the asylum. Those are two separate passes.
Two separate, but yes.
But, yeah,
so the fact being that the family,
a private train, but he has a pass to get on the train.
A pass to get on the passenger train, due to his lineage. And then when I think about, I'm not going to put a spoiler in, but when I think about the ending of the book and why characters decide to behave the way they behave, I again think it's because they're choosing to behave in a way appropriate to their social class. And with the South being the new gentry of the English colonization, and then the planter class becoming the new gentry in America, and those social protocols being adopted that carried on from generation to generation and dictates even today for many of us how we act when we say please or thank you or open a door for someone else. So I'm thinking about social protocols going forward.
I think social class is really important, and you can consider race as allied to that, I think. Yeah, John.
The incident where Grandpa winds up being admitted as the patient instead of Uncle Daniel reminded me of two movies, and also the reference to the asylum and her abhorring the asylum, and the point you made about the asylum, who is crazy, and is somebody crazy just because they want to give their things away to other people? Reminds me of two movies. One is Harvey, and there is the incident where they take Elwood P. Dowd to be admitted to the insane asylum, and his sister winds up being taken into the insane asylum instead of Elwood. And then the other thing it reminds me of is the movie The King of Hearts, which is a French movie about the set in World War I, when all of these different military groups, the Germans, the French, and the English, leave the town, and they leave the key to the insane asylum, or the door to the insane asylum, unlocked, and all the people in the insane asylum come out, and they witness a battle between these different military groups in the town square. And at the end of the movie, when the town is liberated, all the people who in the insane asylum, they go back into the insane asylum and they want to stay there instead of be a part of society. Yeah. And it is a wonderful movie, and parts of it, again, that scene, and then where she says she abhors the asylum, and the family is concerned about Uncle Daniel's generosity and wanting to give things to people, which is really not a bad characteristic, to be generous and to give to other people.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now let's turn to the second chapter, when Uncle Daniel marries Bonnie D and brings her home, and Grandpa comes back from the asylum that very day. He comes back from the asylum and drops dead. What about that whole scene? Bonnie D says the marriage is on trial. I've married him on trial. And right after that, Grandpa drops dead. Anybody? Seems to me, I mean, it's almost as if here's this woman saying, I'm marrying you, Daniel Ponder, on trial. And I am in the position of judging. I am the judge. I have that position. And that's an elevated position to be the judge and to offer the judgment. And Grandpa has not taken that well. That's a heart attack inducer. Yeah. Harriet?
Yeah, I was going to say something like that. You know, I think that Edna Earle describes Bonnie D as not bigger than a minute, and and just like a doll. That the text presents her in the diminutive. But the fact is, Bonnie D is more independent than that, and is trying to tell her own story. I'm thinking about Uncle Daniel saying, Edna Earle saying that Uncle Daniel told everybody's story. Of course, not mine. Love, though he loves me. That sense of um, of of Bonnie D having a story to tell, or building one that Grandpa Ponder can't live with.
Yeah. And then then she leaves. And they want her back. And Edna Earle writes her famous poem to get her back from where they think she's gone. Bonnie D. Ponder, come back to Clay. Many are tired of you being away. Oh, listen to me, Bonnie D. Ponder. Come back to Clay, or husband will wonder. Please to no more wander. As of even date, all is forgiven. Also, retroactive allowance will be given. House from top to bottom, now spick and span. Come back to Clay the minute you can. Signed, Edna Earle Ponder. P.S. Do not try to write a letter. Just come. The sooner the better. Don't try to write. Just come. So, what about that? Why do we get this magnificent piece of verse from Edna Earle? You think? Yeah, Jane?
Well, I don't know about that particularly, but I'm beginning to see from the comments that you're making. Now, I have not finished reading the entire book yet. This is, I've just done my first reading, but it seems to be, I know people like this. I'm from the South. I live in Texas and I have relatives like this. And it's like a not letting go of the past. It's like the Civil War wasn't ever lost. It's an idyllic dream time that I think they're so focused on their lives, that their ancestors' lives that were when they were so glorious, and their land since has and their town has lost its elegance and its allure, and but they can't let go of that. And Bonnie is just a shopkeeper. She's not from a wealthy landowning class. And I think that's one of the things that they decry about her. But yet they know they can't live in the world as it was. And that's why Grandpa has to die, because things are changing that they have no control over.
Anyone else? I'm wondering, here is Edna Earle again manipulating things. Okay, let's get her back. She's gone off. let me take charge and get her back and use my power. Let me exercise my power. Pearl?
Yes, there's a couple of other things here. Also, Robbie Reed was also a shopkeeper. Robbie Reed was also discovered in town when she had been lost or separated. There's King McLean had been seen in another place, and this is illustrating the sort of small town southern venue where you really can't hide, but if you are going to hide, you kind of hide in plain sight so that you can be discovered, because it's no fun to play hide and seek if nobody ever finds you. Then you're just sort of trapped like grandpa was in the asylum. And then there's also, it just takes me right to the end of her writing when they're in Where Is the Voice Coming From? There's the advertisement in the newspaper. So Welty is again using multiple kinds of texts to be able to tell her story. And then remember when Edna Earl is telling about that asylum turning the tables, that's really Uncle Daniel's favorite tale, but she gets to tell it to Mr. Springer this time. So she's in charge.
Joelle,
I just wanted to note that Bonnie D works in a shop. She makes change, which is something that Edna Earl doesn't particularly like, because the change that she's been experiencing has been a downslide. And in fact, Bonnie D is a change maker throughout. And Edna Earl specifically, before she writes the poem, is out with Uncle Ponder on the Ponder place, taking care of him. She's his only audience. And she wants company for him because he wouldn't come into town all the time when Bonnie D was out there listening to him. So she wants this change to be reverted. Bonnie D went a change too far. We know she's got more in her, but that's basically what her motivation is, I think.
The chapter 3 opens, so the marriage trial, only it had completely left our minds. It was one, went on 5 years and 6 months, and Bonnie D, if you please, decided no. And then they put the ad in the paper, and she comes back, and she comes in the room, and she says, Miss Edna Earl, court's opened. So we're going to retry this case. And see, I'm still in charge. I'm the judge. I've come back. We're still having the trial. This trial's not over. So Edna Earl and Bonnie D, it seems to me, are jockeying for control here. Joellen?
Oh, sorry. I didn't get my hand down.
Oh, Cheryl and then Harriet.
I know that not all of us are able to see the comments, so I just wanted to read this from Melissa Fox, especially since we're talking about holding court and the narrator. She said, with this point of view, the reader, or at least I, question the reliability of the narrator and what, in this case, Edna Earl doesn't tell us being equally important as what she does. And at the same time, she tells us how Uncle Daniel loves holding court over an audience. She's doing the same thing with us. And that's from Melissa.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa. How about Harriet?
Yeah, I'm thinking about Bonnie D. And Bonnie D is the public picture of her in Edna Earl's presentation of her is underage and diminutive and a peacock, which has multiple meanings in this story, as she is very fashion oriented.
The clothes horse, yeah.
Yeah, and she is also she acquires. And I wanted to say that reading, I'm thinking about her acquisitions of telephone, electricity, the washing machine. That Bonnie D is a modern woman who welcomes change. I've been thinking about this in relationship to Eudora as I've been thinking about the introduction to Eudora Welty's modernist media interactions with something I've been writing, and Eudora's uh, embrace, well, most modernists, are mourning, male modernists are mourning change and the loss of, looking for a cure for the modern, the loss of spirituality. Welty is out there with a camera and telephone and train and radio and recording and embracing the modern as change, wanting to be not cut off in the imprisonment of her location, connecting with the broader world.
You may be overstating her embracing of technology. She wasn't crazy about a lot of things. Like she never embraced the computer. She wasn't crazy about talking on the phone. But she did have her radio. She did have a telephone. They sent their laundry out. She wasn't too crazy about the washing machine either. So.
Well, my point is just that Bonnie D is a woman who welcomes the change and who is change herself and who is not so much the portrait that Edna Earle creates of her.
I agree with that, though. Yeah. So here she wants all these. She wants a labor-saving device for women, the washing machine. She wants to be in communication. Uncle Daniel. Edna Earle says Uncle Daniel dresses fit to kill. Well, Bonnie D dresses fit to kill too. She's got lots of outfits, and I think Uncle Daniel is content with Edna Earle taking care of him, but Edna Earle wants Bonnie D back, and she's the one that says, "Okay, she's run you off. Let's cut off her allowance, and we'll see if what that does." Yeah, Joe Ellen.
Would we call Bonnie D a narcissist? At least I think about
She
Narcissus.
lives with Narcissus, doesn't she?
Well, and Narcissus within her realm is playing Bonnie D. They're out there playing ladies together. She wears, of course, the cast-offs, possibly with holes in them. She's also afraid of storms and is under the bed with Bonnie D. She also eats at the hotel. Of course, she goes in the back door. But there's a kind of echo here. And so I was thinking about the fact that Narcissus is called Narciss in this, and it kind of drew that attention to the echoes of Bonnie D.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The last thing I want to say about court is the last thing in chapter 4, where we finish, is Edna Earle says, the funeral is over, they get back home, and then they find out they charged us in court. And we're back in court again. And this is a court that they can't totally control anyway. So the whole issue of the court comes up again. Oh, and I forgot to mention that when Bonnie D first comes back answering the ad in the paper, she was giving Uncle Daniel a shave and he faints. So there again, she's in control with the razor at his throat and
Delilah.
Yeah. And Samson and Delilah and cutting off his hair. Yeah. All right. So we're about at the end here. We haven't talked about the names of the characters, Edna Earle and Daniel and Ponder, and Peacock. I think we all have a pretty good sense of those. So maybe that's where we can start next time. Is there anything else you want to say here that we haven't gotten to? Last chance here. Yeah.
I'm just going to mention in the chat, we started comparing Bonnie D to Faye and the Optimist Daughter. So we could pick up on that next time. That's all.
I like her a hell of a lot better than Faye, I'll have to say. But anyway, okay, John. We can't hear you, John.
Excuse me. I might be totally misreading this, but and I'm sure I am, but I thought there were a lot of spiritual and biblical allusions to this work. And Beulah is the name of the hotel and the name of the house. There's actually a Beulah, Mississippi. And Beulah is a Hebrew word that means married. and it's a feminine marriage. Anyway, if you start, it had
There's
not.
also, yeah, there's also the hymn Beulah land, and Beulah land as the land of sort of milk and honey before heaven, in this world before heaven, I think.
Right, right. And that it's, I mean, it's used in Isaiah in the context of that Israel will become remarried to God after the exile and the return to Israel. But
And
there are a lot of,
that links to Daniel too, doesn't it, John?
yes, and and he's constantly getting married. You know, in the course of,
not just 2, 3. He was in that Tom Thumb wedding.
right. So, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that there are a lot of if you start looking for them, even in the first paragraph, there's just a number of allusions to biblical symbols, and I tend to think of Uncle Daniel as a person who's full of grace and very giving and loving, and that is his to a fault that his family is concerned about it, that they are going to be injured by it.
Right. They're minding the main line here, main chance. Yeah. Pearl and Joel, and then we'll let Anna take us away here.
I just wanted to remind us that Welty, it seems like it's going very fast, but Daniel and Uncle Daniel has been married for 5 years and 6 months.
Right.
It's a fairly long time in my mind. And then when Bonnie D comes back, she looked exactly the same, 17. So she's, 22, 23 now, still young, but she's matured during that time. I want to
his first marriage only lasted 2 months. And Miss Teapick, we know, sleeps with a gun by her pillow. So anyway, and then 5 years and 6 months here. Joe Ellen.
I wanted just to raise the issue that sort of questioning or interrogating a little bit what John has said about Uncle Daniel as being mostly generous. He's certainly been written about as pathological, and there are psychological studies of overgivers and why they give. And I think we might at least ask the question why Uncle Daniel does a lot of giving. And I also just want to throw out there, is not in the edition that we're reading, but in the first Harcourt edition and in paperbacks based on it, when Edna Earle is counting cars at the funeral and says there are 79 cars in the train, it's on page 79. Make of that what you will. I love it.
I also wanted to point out that Uncle Daniel keeps saying he wants to eat Bonnie D up, and that he also he never gives her any money when she leaves. It's as if he possessed her, and he didn't need. Once he possessed her, he didn't need to do anything else. So there's also that kind of limitation we see here. All right, well, shut up now.
Well, thank you everybody for all of your wonderful comments, but we are out of time for today. We will return again next Monday. Keep an eye out for that next Welty at Home newsletter, in which I will try to have links to the articles that were mentioned today in the discussion. If you have any other questions, you can always email me info@Eudora Welty House. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one.
Thank you, Anna. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.